Season 11 of RuPaul's Drag Race was a season that was not very highly regarded by fans of the show. On paper, it had a lot going for it. The most amount of queens ever, a very diverse cast, the return of Miss Vangie, the fan favorite of season 10, but these things all backfired. Fans had a hard time keeping track of all of the queens, a lot of them fell flat, and Miss Vangie, well, she didn't perform as well as people had hoped. On top of all of that, there was a winner that a lot of people considered undeserving of the crown. Nasty fighting, some of the most obvious and blatant rigging from producers that we've ever seen. All in all, season 11 did not meet expectations. If you have yet to see the first episode of this series, go check that out. I go through season 12 and discuss some of the riggory happening there. This is going to be a very fun video because there are many season-long storylines that play a major factor in the way that the girls were judged throughout the season and how placements were given. And we are going to dive into all of that. But first, make sure you are following me on my Twitter and my Instagram. I always put polls up on there and memes and shit sometimes, and my thoughts on the new episodes. So go check that out. And if you're able, check out my Patreon. I put up a new video that is for patrons only once a month. You guys help me figure out what that video will be. There's behind the scenes content, a lot of fun stuff. So go check that out. I'm going to look at this season like a game of chess. And the queens are the producers' pieces. Each queen has a role in the season that will help the producers make the best season possible. So just play along with me for this metaphor, guys. In a game of chess, there are pawns, which can only move one square, don't do a ton, and they aren't meant to. They're used to set up the rest of the game. Then there are knights, and they can move a bit more than a pawn, but they still aren't the most important piece. Bishops can move all the way across the board. Then there is the king and the queen. The queen is the most valuable piece, but the king does some cool shit too. Now, this is the chessboard of season 11. Pawns that serve a purpose to get eliminated early never really were meant to be the last pieces left on the board. That's Shitju, Kahana, Honey, Mercedes, Ariel, Scarlett, Suga, and Akiria. Then we have the knights, Plastiq and Raja. They get some storylines and are important to winning the game or having a good season, but are expendable pieces at the end of the day. Our bishops are Nina West and Miss Vangie. They can skip all the way to the end of the board, or in this case, the season. They were always going to go far, and if the path is clear, then they can get there rather easily, especially with some producer tampering. Then we have our rooks, Plastiq and Raja. Then we have only one knight, and that is Silky Nutmeg Ganache. And a knight is a definitely important piece of the puzzle to have, especially towards the end of the game. Then we have our queen, Evie Oddly. They make the best TV, they're the most dynamic on screen, they're going to bring in the most viewers, just like how the queen is the most versatile piece in chess, and usually what will win you the game. That leaves Brook as our king. Not the most exciting piece, but one that's good to have and can still do some damage. Now, if we think of the queens as all serving a role for the producers, like in a game of chess, and now take a look at how the season plays out, it makes the theory that producers produce the season like a game of chess even more credible. So let's dive into the rigging of season 11. Now, I don't think producers necessarily know exactly which queen fits what piece of their story right off the bat. That takes a few episodes to figure out as the relationships start to form and the storylines start to develop. So the first few episodes of most seasons usually have pretty fair judging. For the first 2 episodes, I actually don't think any rigging takes place at all. Episode 1 checks out, episode 2 checks out, but we can still talk about them a little bit. Not every queen is on the same level in a season of Drag Race, and this season is a great example of that. You have Brooklyn Heights and Nina West, 2 huge pageant title holders and huge names in the drag community. Plastiq Tiara and Ariel Versace had giant Instagram followings heading into the season. Obviously, Vanessa Vangie Mateo already came in as a fan favorite. It's in the producer's best interest that the queens with a bigger name last long on the season, as they will likely bring an audience along with them. So I do believe that Nina West and Vanessa Vangie Mateo probably already were considered the bishops on the chessboard by producers before the season even started, and their track records definitely show that. The bottom 3 of episode 1 consisted of Shitju, Kahana, and Nina. All three made terrible looks, and really any of the three could have been justifiably in the bottom, but Kahana was basically unknown going into the season, and yeah, Shichu had a successful YouTube show, but also the storyline was that she was successful online, but wasn't a performer. Ariel set that storyline up for her perfectly, and Shichu going home first was a satisfying conclusion, as it has been set up literally the entire episode. So Nina was the obvious choice to save and see continue in the season. I mentioned Scarlett as a pawn, yet here she is winning a challenge in episode 2. I think it was pretty obvious that Scarlett was the best in this challenge, and one of the best on the runway that week, and she had been delivering solid TV, so I think at this point for the producers, Scarlett might have been a potential rook or even a bishop. But as these episodes go on, it's pretty clear that other queens quickly jump ahead of her in these rankings. The bottom 4 in episode 2 were Brook, Ariel, Mercedes, and Kahana. Now, besides the fact that this was the second episode in a row that Mercedes and Kahana had done badly, it didn't make sense to risk either Ariel or Brook going home. Ariel was giving great TV and had a rivalry with Silky starting to form, and Brook was a huge name who had just won the first challenge, so it is not rocket science here to figure out who they were going to put in the bottom and make lip sync. In this episode, the bottom 2 were the worst in the challenge, and they were also the 2 with the least storyline or merit to keep going forward. In this case, both perspectives line up, but we don't always have that, and we will get to it. So let's move on to episode 3, where I think the first instance of rigging occurs. And it's not in favor of one queen or another. Instead, it's to make dramatic TV. It's the 6-way lip sync. Wow, not the gag they thought it was going to be. This episode could have been very by the book. Nina wins, throw Raja and Honey in the bottom 2, Honey still goes home. But instead, they decided to throw an entire team in the bottom for a gaggy lip sync moment. Instead, it's basically just chaos. I think the producers were hoping the moment would be a lot bigger than it was on social media and in just the canon of Drag Race, which is why they decided to give it a go. But in the end, the same end result occurs, so we can also look at the order in which the girls are named safe from this lip sync to kind of see a hierarchy. Plastiq did the best in the lip sync and was named safe first. But I think it's also obvious that she was the queen they were least willing to lose here. Next safe is Raja, who had been giving amazing confessionals and tons of drama, so obviously they don't want to lose her yet either. Then Scarlett, who did good in the lip sync and had just won a challenge. And that leaves the bottom 3 of Akuria, Suga, and Honey. I think from what we've seen in the show up to this point, episode 3, they were definitely low on the priority list of producers, and this definitely proved that. But Akuria is saved, then Suga, and they both had one high placement each at this point, with Honey just being safe the whole time. So Honey leaving here makes total sense. And she didn't have a storyline anyway. So let's just move on to episode 4. Here we start to have some very obvious rigging. At this point, Silky Nutmeg Ganache has been TV gold. She caused a ruckus and Untucked for literally no reason the episode prior. Her and Evie are fighting and obviously hate each other. She's had spats with Ariel, and many other girls have said they find her annoying. So, from the producer's perspective, she's giving them everything they could possibly want. It was smart to kind of start to push her as a potential threat in this competition, because what is that going to cause? Drama. So the longer she stays, the more drama she can start. The trouble is, up to this point, Silky's been coasting in the challenges. She's done okay in all of them, but hasn't had a standout moment yet. Enter Trump the Rusical. Silky is given the same part that Shea Coulee basically had in the Kardashian Rusical. She comes in halfway, has a little solo part, and it's kind of supposed to be like a standout moment. But unlike Shea, I don't think Silky's part was win-worthy. She didn't do anything wrong, she was perfectly fine, but the part itself wasn't written to be very funny, and she didn't add anything crazy to the part to zhuzh it up at all. It was just a solid, safe performance with a solid, safe runway. And then she wins. Cut to the internet losing its mind, cut to Silky getting hate mail for the rest of the season, cut to Evie starting her robbed queen narrative with the fanbase. I fully think that Silky got this win here to establish her as a presence in the competition. The audience isn't going to root for someone that has yet to stand out, and I think this was the producer's way of trying to forcibly make that happen, but we all know it didn't pan out that way. This season also has a habit of throwing the same queens in the top, literally every week. Brook and Evie are in the top together, basically every single challenge until Snatch Game, and that means 2 of the 3 top placements each week are taken by the same 2 people. That doesn't leave many other queens much wiggle room to make a statement in the competition. I think that's another reason why this season is seen as a weaker one. There are 6 queens that were never given positive critiques on the runway. The first 5 weeks are kind of a slog because the show makes it so obvious who is not a threat and who is not going to last long. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. It's time to bring up one of the most glaring examples of rigging throughout the season. And that is how Vanessa Vangie Mateo was judged. Vangie is playing Rosie O'Donnell in The Rusical, but watching the performance, I would have guessed she was playing Abby from NCIS. Being assigned such a huge personality like Rosie, Vangie fumbled the ball hard. I think harder than Raja O'Hara, for sure, but Vangie saved, and this is going to be a recurring event throughout the season. So let's move on. Episode 5. We have the Halloween Ball. Brook gets the win, despite her final look not fitting the category literally at all. Evie's in the top, even though they literally tell her they dislike her final look. This episode is a mess, guys, and I have an entire video all about it, which you can check up in the upper corner. This episode is kind of an enigma to me, because every decision made is just baffling, from a storytelling perspective and from a competitive perspective. The storyline of this episode could have easily been Raja and Scarlett as the 2 delusional villains who are the top 2, with either getting a win and pissing off the other girls, especially like Evie and Brook and Ariel, causing more tension and jealousy. And then we have Ariel, who stumbles and falls in her lip sync, but still does a good enough job, and Suga, who has no storylines or relationships that we've seen up to this point, go home. Instead, Ariel goes home, and Brook and Evie are put in the top again for no reason. Not really sure why. I mean, I know Evie was put in the top since she's the weird look queen, and this is a Halloween ball, but then they give her negative critiques on her final look anyways, so wouldn't it have been better to just keep her safe? Losing Ariel this early, I think, was a mistake. She'd been giving great confessionals, she had rivalries with several of the queens, and even though she tripped in the lip sync, she still did a better job than Suga. I think overall this episode is a major miss, and I don't even have an explanation behind why they made the decisions they made, except maybe wanting to make an example out of Ariel, which is sad because you're saying basically if you trip, you're done. Bye. Like, leave. Sashay away. And I guess Brooklyn is the sewing queen of the season. I don't know. This episode sucks, guys. Episode 6, we have another very controversial decision, sending Scarlett and V home in the lip sync. Now, the rest of the episode, Akira's team being in the top and Akira getting the win, Scarlett and Raja being in the bottom, all fair and balanced, unlike Fox News' crusty ass. The reason why Scarlett going home made people so mad is because it was a very unfulfilling end to her season-long story arc. We've been told all season by all of the queens that Scarlett is overconfident and full of herself. But Scarlett's perspective, and what she's been showing us in the challenges, is that her confidence is warranted because she's talented, and the other queens are just as confident as her, so they have no reason to be coming for her the way that they are. Scarlett is the underdog here, even more than Evie at this point. The episode sets her up as a terrible dancer, and it shows in the challenge, but she delivers in the lip sync. A satisfying conclusion would have been her proving the queens who have antagonized her and underestimated her this entire season wrong, sending home the queen who did it the most in Raja O'Hara. Instead, the queens all dogpile Scarlett and tell her she deserves to go home on the main stage. Raja rips her apart and Untucked, and then despite serving one of the best lip syncs of the season, she's sent home. It's sad. We all want her to succeed and prove everyone wrong, and not getting that conclusion just kind of makes you upset for her. And that's why everyone stormed social media to destroy Raja. Now, I do think Raja did well enough in the lip sync to win. I thought they both did great. But from a storytelling perspective, Scarlett should have won, and Raja had more fumbles throughout the season so far than Scarlett did. So Scarlett leaving here just didn't make sense. And I think it was one of the big factors that soured people on the season. Alright, episode 7 is equally a disaster, and it's when people started to turn on Plastiq Tiara. It's very obvious this entire episode was meant for Plastiq to win. She gets her drag mother to visit, she gets an overproduced moment with Rue, she gets a message from her boyfriend in Untucked, she doesn't get red for serving the same silhouette every single week, and instead gets the win for it. It was very transparent, and viewers were not amused. And neither were the queens, as we see Raja call it out in Untucked. Vangie gets critiqued in the previous episode that she has been serving the same silhouette way too much, which is just like a swimsuit, basically. But at that point, Vangie had worn this silhouette 3 times. Episode 7, the episode Plastiq wins, she wins in her overdone corseted look, which she has done 5 times. But no word from this from the judges. Isn't that interesting? I think it's just obvious that the producers knew the competition was starting to dwindle down, and someone as big of a fan base as Plastiq was a great candidate for All-Stars. So giving her a win here just kind of made sense. But we have Yvie Oddly, who served us a completely different silhouette than she's given us previously, and showed a completely different side of her drag with this gorgeous gown and makeup. Did Plastiq give us a beautiful look? Yes, but it was nothing new that we haven't seen from her before, unlike Yvie's. On the other end, Raja made pants, a top, a headpiece, and a wig, and looked pretty good. Nina West used legit corn husks to create a pretty decent look. Vangie tied some rope together and sewed some fabric around her waist, and is safe. I don't see it. She looked unfinished, and like she put very minimal effort in. And this is the second time I'm going to say Vangie was saved by the judges. Now we're at episode 8, the Snatch Game. Silky winning made total sense. She did amazing. And the bottom 3 were correct as well. All 3 sucked pretty equally. But the producers had a few options here. They could put Brook and Vangie in the bottom and have their story as lovers come to an end with them having to lip sync against each other. They could have Yvie and Vangie lip sync, since they had a rivalry the past episode, and could boil over into this lip sync. Or they could have Yvie and Brook lip sync, who are the 2 biggest competitors left at this point, which would be a gaggy moment. Yvie and Vangie make up in this episode from their fight, so that wouldn't really make much sense storyline-wise anymore to put them in the bottom. And if Brook and Vangie are in the bottom together, then their story is basically over, even if they both stay. Them lip-syncing together is kind of the big payoff of their story, and doing it so early in the season would be kind of a bummer. I think of the 3, Yvie was the most expendable at this point. Her storyline with Vangie played out, and she accepted responsibility for coming at the girls too harsh with her opinions. Her and Silky's rivalry hadn't sparked up in a while, and she'd had a pretty good showing. Now, I do think this probably would have been a double Shantae no matter what pair of girls were in the bottom 3, but Yvie was the most expendable just in case. I do think Vangie should have been in the bottom here, though. She didn't commit to her accent at all, and her runway was the weakest of the 3, not listening to the critiques of the judges and coming out in another swimsuit, which they read her for. But at the end of the day, they all sucked, so it's not really that huge of a deal. Episode 9 is the Ladp Improv Challenge. Everything plays out pretty fair, but it gives me a chance to talk about Miss Akira Davenport. In the beginning of the video, I put her as a pawn, and yet here she is, along with Suga, still in the competition with 2 wins under her belt. I don't think Akira was a main priority of the judges or the producers, as we talked about during the 6-way lip sync, but both of the times Akira won, they were pretty uncontested wins. No one came close to matching her energy in these challenges, and we know how much the show loves a pageant queen proving she's goofy storyline. So I think she impressed the producers enough to have her stick around, but I don't really think she was ever a viable option for the crown at the same time. Plastiq goes home here, and they kind of drag her through the mud with the edit on the way out, which is kind of interesting for a queen they obviously wanted to stick around, but maybe they're setting up a story for when she inevitably returns for All-Stars? Episode 10, the Assassination of Sugarcane. I think it's very obvious Suga didn't have any storylines, she didn't win any challenges, they barely showed her the entire season. The other 6 queens left in the competition at this point were just more interesting. So they got rid of her despite her giving a great performance. It was super obvious, people were super pissed. I was upset for Suga, but at the same time, I understood the move. I think a better option though would have been to have the Yvie and Silky lip sync happen here. Neither did well in the challenge, and in this episode we start to see their rivalry heat back up. I think this would have been the perfect time for it. But at the same time, I think at this point production probably saw them as both viable options in the finale to win. So sending one home now might cut that storyline short, and I definitely think they wanted to see that lip sync play out in the finale. Now we have the assassination of Nina West in episode 11. Well, kind of. This is the 3rd highly controversial elimination of the season. Usually there's 1, maybe 2 max in a season, And having 3 very popular contestants sent off this way really pissed off audiences. The entire season built Nina West up as the lovable comedy queen who had a heart of gold, rose above all the drama, and was a hero of the community. A lot of people would have loved to see her in the finale, and a lot of people really wanted to see her win. She'd never been in the bottom, and only really struggled when it came to sewing challenges and some of her runways. But these last 2 runways, she'd gotten rave reviews, and she was on the come-up. So when she finds herself in the bottom for the first time against Silky, and does a boring job, but clean at the very least, and is then sent home, people really lost it. Silky did not have a good edit. The edit drug her through the mud literally all season. People did not like Silky because of this, and with one of her wins being seen as undeserved, people were ready for her to go home. Silky is an absolute disaster in this lip sync, tripping over her garment, flopping all over the stage. People were willing to accept a double sachet, but saving Silky and sending home Nina? This was kind of the final nail in the coffin for a lot of people with this season. On the other hand, we have Brook getting another questionable win, which soured people against her even further. This was the perfect time for a Vangie win, and she deserved it in this challenge, which was the makeover. It would have been a great end to her storyline of not being able to impress the judges as much as she had hoped, and not living up to the expectations she set up for herself. Giving her this win in the final stretch would have been amazing to watch and such a comeback, but instead, they give it to Brook, who gets her 3rd win. This episode was a mess, storytelling-wise, as was much of the season, as I've been stating this entire video. This also could have been the Yvie and Silky lip sync, as Yvie's makeover wasn't much better than Nina's, but I think the producers were literally hellbent on them lip syncing in that finale together, thinking it would have been a great finish to the season-long storyline. As we all know, it doesn't happen, and that's another strike against the season. There's no payoff to the story like they wanted, and it could have happened in episodes 10 or 11, so I completely blame the producers for dropping the ball on that one. Episode 12 is the Brook and Vangie lip sync we were expecting all season. Brook sends home Vangie. I think they missed an opportunity to give Yvie a second win here. It would have made things a lot more balanced going into the finale. 3 queens with 2 wins and 1 queen with 3. Instead, Yvie goes into the finale with the worst track record, only having 1 shared win, and then people get mad when she wins. So Yvie's track record is definitely unbalanced. She was safe times I thought she should have been in the bottom. She was not given wins that she totally deserved. A whole mess. In the end, this season was handled very poorly by producers. They tried very hard to deal with all the storylines happening throughout the season, and they dropped the ball time and time again. The first words that the queens say during their entrance are a good detector of what their overall storyline of the season is. So let's look back and see if those storylines came to fruition. Shitchu mentions her show on YouTube, but wants to prove that she's a performer, and Ariel sets up that she doesn't think that she is. This has a pretty good conclusion. It shows us that just because a queen is successful online, you need more than that to succeed on this show, and Shitchu goes home first. Kahana just basically talks about being gorgeous. She never had much of a story.
Honey's style is anything the hell I feel like that day. I always say, I might wear Givenchy, but labels don't fit me.
Honey talks about what a legend she is in New York, and mentions not really fitting into any box. This story doesn't play out since we basically never see her, and then she goes home.
I am the African princess. I'm from Mombasa, Kenya. I moved to America when I was 11.
Mercedes talks about how she's the first Muslim queen, and we definitely see this story pay off. She does get a lot of great content about this and is great representation.
I have almost 80,000 followers on Instagram, but I think it's really annoying when people are always Ariel from Instagram. Ariel can sing, she can act, she can dance, and if you're gonna come see me in a show, I'm not just gonna stand there I'm gonna turn it out.
Ariel wants to break the stigma that Instagram queens aren't talented or aren't performers. Ariel is a great performer, but she doesn't get to prove this, and her storyline is cut short in her elimination instead of giving it a satisfying conclusion.
My drag is about embracing the beauty that you were blessed with, and I happen to be very blessed.
Scarlett's is clearly about how she's confident and talented, and we sort of see this, but after being underestimated by her peers all season, she gets sent home after they all tear her down by saying she deserves to go home and is untalented. So, not a good conclusion.
I'm known for my kicks, my splits, my energy, but Raja is also it.
Raja basically just talks about what a great queen she is and hypes herself up. And then is put in the bottom every chance that she could possibly be and doesn't get rewarded for her good work. So that obviously isn't a satisfying conclusion.
I think most queens would think that, oh, she's young and she's just pretty. What else can she do? But I have some stuff in my repertoire.
Plastiq has the same story as Ariel, trying to prove she's more than just an Instagram queen, but she does show this, and that storyline does pay off.
I decided to quit my job and do drag full time, and you not, like 2 days later, I got a call from Drag Race.
Suga's story is about how she quit her job to do drag, and now it's all gonna pay off now that she's on Drag Race. And this goes kind of nowhere. It's not really brought up very often, and Suga is kind of sidelined the entire season screen time-wise. So no storyline of hers is really covered.
So if the queens, if they know who I am, I think some are gonna go, she's here.
Nina talks about how she's a big name, and we see her fail in the first episode, but then she proves it later on. So definitely a good story arc.
I want to show America that I'm more than just a meme. I'm not a one-episode trick pony.
Vangie wants to show America she's more than a meme. She does prove this, sort of, but the storyline would have been completed with a win at the final 6, and she doesn't get it. So I'm going to say this storyline was not completely satisfied.
You know what? I do consider myself a pageant queen. I know some of y'all don't like that word, but hey, I'm here to change your mind on it, and I can bet you that.
Brook and Akira both talk about how they're pageant queens who want to make America appreciate the pageant queen. I would say that they do.
I want to use this platform to further my career, you know, having my own spin-off show, which I want coming in the door, and I'm going to be honest about that. Or my own cooking show, which I want as well. I just want to entertain.
Silky just wants to entertain and get her own spinoff. Well, that never happened. So
Denver predominantly had the sparkly dancing, like bodysuit, hair flipping queens, and I shook that up.
Evie wants to wave her freak flag high and shake up the competition just like she did Denver. And that she definitely did, but at the same time, winning the Farm Challenge or the Queens Everywhere Challenge would have been the perfect conclusion to the storyline. It would have rewarded her for showing versatility in the Farm Challenge, but then also rewarded her for being at her absolute weirdest in the Final Challenge. So I'm gonna say Evie did not have a satisfying story arc. I would say only 5 queens have what I consider, in my opinion, a satisfying story arc. That's not a lot, and I think that's a big factor in why this season feels lackluster and pissed off so many fans. A good season can balance storylines while also rewarding queens when they deserve it. I feel like this season failed on that end. So much obvious rigging occurred, and that's nothing new, but older seasons managed to make it feel more organic and satisfying to the viewer. Many people had a bad taste in their mouths after this season for what they perceived as queens like Silky and Brook being shoved down their throats, while many queens got pushed to the wayside. Let me know in the comments what instance of rigging pissed you off the most when you first watched this season. And do you agree with everything that I mentioned? Make sure to vote in the poll coming up soon on my community tab, because your votes will help me put together the follow-up to this video where I go through how season 11 would have went if it wasn't rigged. So go check that out. Your votes are much appreciated. Well, it has been a long day trying to solve the mystery of what the producers were on when they made this season. The answer was everything. Every drug imaginable. That's the only conclusion I can come to, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I am having so much fun with this channel, and I hope that you guys are enjoying it too. Let me know in the comments if there's any series that you would like me to maybe start tackling. I'm open to new ideas, and I definitely want to keep this channel fresh. So thank you so much. Have a great week,